Hi guys, my name's Ben Ritchie. I'm Chief Product Officer at Cognism currently, but got a decade of successes and failures in banks behind me, and a similar amount of time and similar stories in startups as well. So I think I'm in a pretty good position to talk about how best to bring code to the real world and see if, and actually make impacts in people's lives. Um, so I want to talk about coding as evolution. Um, and I'm not here to tell you that, functional programming is going to save the world, and that you're all doing it wrong if you're using procedures. No, I'm here to talk about conflict, win and loss, and waste, which I believe are, the three pillars of evolution. This is all coming from the fact that the industry as a whole has kind of learned that, um, predicting requirements and having really expansive product requirement documents that everyone follows just aren't working. Um, you know, what this is all about is like, how do you search the solution space to find product market fit when the behavior of the actors involved, the users, the admins, the buyers in that space can't be accurately predicted. I'm a massive fan of customer discovery, of putting in work with UX researchers, etc. But the reality is that even with that work, quite often projects fail. So it's all about how do you minimize that risk of project failure and, speed up the rate at which projects that are doomed to fail fast. So the common kind of way of thinking about this is like popularized by Eric Ries, and it's called the Lean Startup. And it's all about the science of kind of invalidating our assumptions as soon as possible by building a sort of build, measure, learn project loop. So we have different ideas that we build into products. We take them out to market, measure them, and then we learn what kind of impact that's had on the market. The relationship to evolution is slightly different, I think, in this regard. The assumptions behind getting it right and building it first time, and then just learning about it in the market are, locked in this idea that we can go back into the labs and make the right choices. But increasingly you see with consumer sites that there's kind of more and more A/B testing, where different variants of the site are created and then tested in the marketplace. And this starts to sound a bit like evolution. So, evolution is allowing lots of different mutations to occur and then seeing which ones are fitter and survive. So if we're going to be inspired by that, and we think that's an interesting heuristic for optimizing solutions or entities, then let's look at what kinds of tools are available and what kind of cultural changes might exist to make that possible. So what's the actual problem? Why am I even talking about this stuff? My experience in the last 20 years, and even to this day, is that, more often than not, you get unclear expectations for a given project. You're just handed down some specs. You're not clear, is this like something that's really strategic and is going to live for 10 years, or are we just doing this as like an experiment? We need to hack this out. That sort of scope is captured sometimes, but you're missing the bigger sort of picture of what the portfolio of bets are. What are the bets that the company's making, and where does this sit? There's no sense of completion. So, more often than not, you'll do a piece of work and you'll move on to the next story. You're not really sure about what impact you've had. Missing out on a lot of that kind of joy that you get when you really sort of see the impact. And you're also sort of shielded somewhat from the failure. Things fail slowly and you don't really get a sense of the metrics behind it. Technical debt. So, 50% of dev time is purportedly unavailable after a large deployment. And this is because, again, I think we don't really know whether we succeeded or failed. We keep huge feature sets around, unclear even if our customers are even using them. We end up getting given designs that just don't make sense, won't be easy to code, won't necessarily map to existing or component libraries or, things like that. Like I've seen sort of lots of strange attempts to build animation into radio buttons or other sorts of UI elements that break all sorts of paradigms around keyboard navigation, etc. Or worse still, you get a design handed to you and the designer's moved on to another project and they don't really have time to continue providing iterations. So you have that as a shared resource that you have to fight for. And then, we've all been in big canned projects. We've been working till midnight, trying to make something work in the marketplace, only to see them canned. And, just kind of multitasking generally. Like most dev teams I see are still sort of these feature factories that get a huge amount of stories that have to work through, all kind of disconnected and spread across the different parts of the app and not really having a sense of ownership. We can see 31% of projects get canned, fail, and a lot of the time people are losing their jobs or huge amounts of money are spent on those projects before they're finally canned. And then, of course, you've got the classic kind of imperfect definitions of projects and just misprediction of the amount of work necessary. So what do? I'm not going to try and sell you some sort of framework that I've been working on. I'm going to tell you about things that are quite common, quite well known, and tell you what you can do as an engineer and what you might expect in terms of like what your management will do, and hopefully you can sort of apply some influence to if you're not doing those things. It's a call to arms really for everyone in the leadership and development community to start to sort of think in this evolutionary way and start to sort of believe in what I'm telling you so that you can apply it in your own workplaces. So, quite often ideas will live and die, and sometimes like the dev team just doesn't even get a chance to get involved. It will be some sort of highly paid person's opinion that decides everything. And what we want to do is we want to sort of democratize that and make it available so that developers have some input into the direction of the company. We talk about tech products all the time. If we don't have tech involvement in this decision making, then we're missing out on all of the sort of nuts and bolts kind of innovation that's possible, the bottom up innovation and ideas that perhaps we're not seeing. So the cone of uncertainty is this concept in Agile that kind of represents like when should we start making promises and where does the risk lie in terms of our ability to estimate. And over the last 20 years, the Agile movement's all been about like having the dev team be better at taking changes delivered from above. And that could be sort of painful and stressful in itself. Product and design teams use this to haggle for more budget. They believe that, if they can have more and more sort of research time, that they'll deliver this golden spec that will deliver an amazing business, iteration. But the reality is that, you can ask people if they'll pay for things and they'll say yes. But then when you actually start to release it, they don't actually get their wallets out. And, it's hard for them themselves in that research phase, to the customer, to be able to predict whether or not they would actually buy something when it comes to the crunch based on some designs that are flashed up on PowerPoint or whatever. So, and then I talked about this earlier, there's friction and opportunity within the nuts and bolts of talking to developers. And really a theme of this talk is to bring developers into conversations earlier and really have, involvement throughout. So we talked about lean, and some of the issues, are that interesting metrics aren't being captured because the dev team, are the best people to instrument the project and the product and understand exactly where interesting measurements might be captured. But because devs don't understand why they're doing a lot of the things they're doing and they're not kind of emotionally invested, sometimes if they're under bad management, then they don't know how to course correct what they're doing, and they have to then go out, release, find out from the customer and the product team it's wrong, it's painful, and then go on that emotional journey. So the loop doesn't spin as fast as it might, this build, learn, and measure loop. So the suggestion that's been popular has been to reduce these handoffs, these one-way handoffs, to speed up the learning loop. And one of the ways people are doing that is they're trying to keep teams small. So these are small teams that have total ownership end-to-end of a problem. And they've got some sort of psychological safety there as well because they're working in a squad. And by limiting their scope, they don't have to sit in on stand-ups to talk about a whole bunch of different things that another squad would be working on. They can really start to have interesting conversations. And equally, you start to see devs spending more time with customers and getting more emotional investment in the actual product side. So we talked about the 3 pillars of evolution. We talked about conflict there. And now we're going to talk a little bit about like winning and losing. If we look at the evolution of all creatures on Earth, organisms, then we can see that dinosaurs had a good run, but there they are in green here, just completely getting wiped out. Mass extinction is pretty much like a common theme, and so what does that mean? It means that nature has an incredible optimization system called evolution, but even that is wasteful, and there has to be loss for there to be winners. I'm not a fan of companies that have this success theatre thing going on. They're constantly saying, everything's great. When you look at the stock price, it's going down. We need to be able to fail. We need to be able to celebrate that. Like, hey, we tried this thing and we learned that this doesn't work and that works for these reasons. So we need to, think of ourselves as more R&D teams and less kind of do or die. And it's understandable because a lot of the time, like, companies will fire teams that supposedly fail. Squads gives us a chance to kind of break away from that by giving us a chance to own small problems that are allowed to fail. So, how do you get rid of the pure social aspect of salesmanship and just power games that can be involved in, winning and losing? One of the things that I've seen and used successfully has been like building prioritization frameworks to decide what to do next. An example of that is ROI scoring. That's on the right here. So, if you're on a site that has a lot of traffic you can play with, you can potentially talk about the reach that a given feature is going to have across that traffic, the impact, the confidence you have that it's going to have that impact, and then the effort from the dev side, from the UX side, data science side to actually build that thing. And this gives you a score, and the higher that score, the more likely that it's a low-hanging fruit. It's going to have a big bang for small amount of effort. It's still guessing, but it allows for a much more nuanced discussion, and you can kind of break a bigger argument down. It's much harder for salespeople to go unchecked if they're going to, try and sell an idea to people purely on their influence and character. If you're going to have like loads of different versions of the site, like Facebook has 10,000 variants live at any given time, you're going to need to think about tooling. There's a bunch of tools that can help you here, but I can recommend A/B testing tools like Google Optimize and Optimizely. You're going to want to be able to turn up features on and off and deliver like incrementally to small proportions of your population of users given features, and you want to be able to measure accurately like what impacts that's had on their behaviors over time, and these are some of the tools you want to look at for that. So the final part of the talk just talks about like waste. I'm trying to speed up a bit because I'm conscious we've got 3 minutes. Like we talked about winning and losing, obviously. Like we talked about the dinosaurs, right? Like these mass extinction events as the organisms started to adapt to new regimes in the environment, whether it be a surplus amount of oxygen or, massive increase in carbon dioxide. And the equivalents in the business world can be, the introduction of mobile or, sort of key technologies that enable disruption. and it means projects are going to die. But as I say, by having kind of dynamic squads and a culture of acceptance of failure, it's much easier for teams to be fluid. Still painful, but it needs to be clear success failure metrics for the squad. On the concept of metrics, each squad kind of owns some sense of belief about where the company's headed and what product market fit might look like. And the North Star metric will often be the one given metric that you define as the most important to drive forward as a squad. And you may even be defining your success and failure metrics around that. This is the place where you negotiate with management on what you think you can achieve. And they may define at that time as well whether or not the project will get canned if it doesn't achieve certain metric changes. So for this talk, for example, it might be how many people stick around until the end, until the networking section, which I hope will be a good proportion. So, ruthlessness, I think, it's fair to say that evolution is pretty ruthless. There's no sentimentality in it, but it's also incredibly efficient. If the members of the team can't deliver the business impact that they predicted, then they may be redeployed. But let's consider that in many, larger, older companies, you're given a huge Death March project where you're hired just to do that, spending 2 years just to prove that something someone thought of over a 1 month, 2 month period is definitely true and that the product can be built. And then if it doesn't work, you get fired. We should be building squads and guilds and resources based on their skills that are more fluid, that can then be redeployed into new explorations for value based on the budgets that the company has. There's always a search for value, and it's not sort of necessarily skill dependent. Now, I'm not promising that deploying a squads and guilds model or whatever is going to save your job, but my belief is that that this is how you develop cultural and technological evolution capability in businesses. Thanks for everyone's time. I really appreciate that. I can send out these slides afterwards that has links. Keep evolving.